Welcome to Professor's Corner. I'm joined by Melissa. We're talking about the ethical dimensions of public policy. In particular, we want to try to bring together those areas that go beyond the observational fact. We're calling that metaphysics. And we're discussing about the role of these sort of abstract thinking in terms of public policy and their appropriateness for involving them in the decision making.
So one question I have, considering what we've talked about so far, is there's a lot of abstract terms here.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way that I could think about this in my mind? We've got the meta-ethics, and then we've got sort of the de facto, if I remember, de facto morality.
Mm-hmm.
How can I capture that and think about that in a way that might help me make sense of it?
Good. I think we can give you a mental image, and we'll do that. You'll be reading about that in a book by Basil Mitchell. It's in chapter 7. The odd thing about reading this, you're going to be reading it online through the Gifford Lectures, there's no page references.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll just look it up and you'll go to chapter 7. This is about midway through that chapter.
Okay.
So bear in mind, don't get frustrated. You're reading one of the most sophisticated Christian philosophers of the 21st century. He's passed away now, but at any rate, we borrow a lot of his thinking because we're trying to build the world view around doing public policy.
Okay.
Let's take a look at, to chart this, let's take a look at a pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
The big idea here is we're moving on a continuum of levels of, in a way, levels of abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
In another way, we're moving at levels, moving away from observational information, what's observable, up through those things that are more invisible, non-observable, more conceptual in nature. So we start at the bottom of the pyramid and we'll build our way up. When morality gets involved in public policy, it's looking at the morals of what we've called the de facto positive or the populist morality, what we see out there.
That's what's in place at the moment.
It's what is. Every time somebody comes in, in your neighborhood and they're too loud, or somebody takes something from somebody,
I think, well, we have rules and laws about stealing, or we have noise ordinances in our county or city. Okay.
So, and we're trying to figure out how does this all connect? And some people will say, well, morality has nothing to do with public policy. Obviously, the thesis of this course is it has a lot to do. But there's different ways to think about morality. So when we look at the de facto positive morality, people have views about race. They have views about national identity. They have views about life. They have views about how to treat their elders. They have views about how to treat one another and friends. They have views about allocation of wealth and resources, how much, how little. All of these are involving things that we can measure, but they also are values that we use to assess decisions that we might make in this area. Without any sort of reflective thought, we are operating at the de facto, the Latin term for what presents itself to us, what is the fact that we observe.
What happens when we start to add layers of abstraction and we're able to critically think about?
Exactly. What happens is we get in disagreements, right?
Yes.
And they can get sometimes pretty intense. So what we are going to be doing as public policy specialists, we're going to climb to a higher level. We're going to move up the pyramid into the realm of the normative. And we'll call that the critical theory. Mm-hmm. Now, some people believe critical theory means that these intuitions that we have, and again, I want to refer you back to the Theological Frontiers of Ethics that you learned in 323, and it's another presentation for this week, to give you some idea of how culture plays with fundamental platitudes of practical reason, these intuitions, moral intuitions we have. But we think those are generally reliable, but some people don't. Their critical morality will be used to filter those out. We call that kind of normative ethics.
When I think normative, I hear the word norm in there, setting the norms.
Yes.
I'm moving from what is to what perhaps should be.
Yes, and
Is
it's
that
structure.
true?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
structuring. It's structuring the way we do indeed operate, with the way we do indeed think when we think about ethically.
Great.
Now, then in our pyramid, oftentimes, and we'll talk about this a little more in detail, but we have a theory, and we think, well, how do we pick the theory? How do words operate within the theory, like right and wrong, good and bad, are your more generic terms. But we also can think about other evaluative terms like being an adult, pluralism, gender. These are terms that are used. You wouldn't think of them necessarily as evaluative terms, but we use them in evaluative ways. We're going to have to talk about that.
Okay.
Our language plays in. Chapter 7 and your introduction in the Mitchell book, Morality, Religious and Secular, he's talking about this.
Okay.
So take your time and think through those because they'll help us. You won't grasp everything that's going on in there, but you'll get the general sense of how important language plays. So we move to the higher level of metaphysics and metaethics that talk about the scope and the nature and the purpose of morality and social ideals, and those come into play.
So now it's not just what is at the de facto level, then what should be at the normative level, and then why what should be.
Yeah.
Is that, are we up at the whys?
The higher up we go.
This is really difficult. These are some of the hardest types of questions I would have had in school.
Yes.
It's hard.
It's a new way of thinking.
Yes.
We tend to want to think, can I just memorize something? And oh, by the way, if I move to this higher level of reasoning, is there any kind of procedure or method? And this is not algorithm.
Right.
This is not geometry. It's not algebra. And when we get our arguments, they're not proofs in the sense that there are no other choices on the table. What we're looking for in terms of truth is a kind of a systematic coherence where we're bringing together fact in its the most relevant facts in the most relevant way, comprehensively, and that they have to fit together.
Right.
And so when we're done, our arguments may not be conclusive, but they should be convincing.
Yes.
And I would suggest that despite how your peers in public policy are going to be operating when they bring you their econometrics models or when they bring you their epidemiological models and they're saying this is fact and you've got to believe this, they are bringing with that a certain ethical framework, meta-ethical framework to bear.
They may not be aware of it.
And may not be aware of it.
If they aren't aware of it, if you can be aware of it, maybe you can help gently move the discussion to talk about some of those issues.
So, exactly right. So what we want to do is get to agreement, right? That's what constitutionalism is all about, is the agreement. But we have to understand that there's a lot of disagreement. Maybe it will help us to categorize the disagreements and to recognize those.
What types of disagreements might we have?
Well, let's break them off into sort of 3 levels. Let's start, with metaethics. There, the disagreements are going to be about the concepts and the types of arguments that we're making at these lower levels on the pyramid. What do we think is the standard of right or wrong, good or bad? If we're bringing in, you oftentimes hear ours is a pluralist society, right? Well, when you say that, if you mean that is just, I look out there and I see people with a diversity of different beliefs, nobody's got a debate about that. But if you say ours is a pluralist and it ought to be a pluralist society, now you have to think about another issue. Does that mean that diversity is going to trump any shared morality? Because as we just said a moment ago, some shared morality, and we're going to argue that it makes a difference, the type, but everybody agrees that some shared morality is necessary for the existence of society. That's why this idea that you shouldn't enforce your morals or you shouldn't impose your morals on somebody else is sort of a meaningless statement, because everybody agrees that some morality is necessary in shaping various institutions we have to live under.
Right.
So those the types of things are at the highest level of the metaethics.
What
the
are
status
some
morality.
disagreements we might hit at the normative level?
Okay, so well, we have to pick a normative theory, and once we pick that, you've already mentioned a couple of concepts that we're going to explore: utilitarian, deontology. The author that we're going to be using here, Bloom, talks about prudent pragmatism. Those would be theories that we have to deal with, and in those contexts, we're looking at how those theories operate, even if we concede to somebody a theory, we're going to have to be looking at those theoretical structures, and we're going to have some disagreement about how those structures come into play.
And what happens at the de facto level?
Well, those are the ones that we're accustomed to looking at all the time. In fact, sometimes people say, I hate to talk to my friend or something, because we just, we get into these conversations. You've heard it before.
Is this the funny thing where, you're going to be at a meal with the family and they say, hey, leave religion and politics off the table. And then inevitably they come up anyways. But
that's exactly right. So we're going to be dealing with those. So some questions at the metaethics and normative levels might be, at metaethics it might be, what is the status of moral claims? Are they true or false? Are they objective, or are they all subjective? Can moral claims and theories be true or false? Can we have moral knowledge? And if so, how? Is there always good reason to believe and to act morally? Mm-hmm. And how does the evidence relate to moral principles, or how do we relate our general moral principles to relevant facts and information? That we move from the general to the particular. How does all that relate? Those are how we do all this is kind of metaethical types of issues. At the normative level, the types of disagreements and the questions that come up are, what are the fundamentals of moral duties? Mm-hmm. Which character traits or virtues and which are vices? Mm-hmm. Who should our role models be? Mm-hmm. And do the ends justify the means? Those are the types of things that we're going to get into. And if we look at this, mm-hmm. metaethics is looking at three categories that we'll now move into in future weeks of normative theory: consequentialism, or what sometimes referred to as utilitarianism, deontology, and virtue. And you can kind of see that we're going to be taking those theories and we're going to be applying them to public policy issues.
Great.
And that's what this course is going to do.
I look forward to that.
Good.